Center for Political Education welcomes you to FreeCity, the fight to save San Francisco City's college and education for all. This event is co-sponsored by MP Press. The purpose of this event is twofold. It's a moment to uplift and celebrate the recent publication of a book that this event takes its title from, which narrates the years-long struggle by students, faculty, staff, and community members at City College of San Francisco to pull through an accreditation crisis and win free tuition for students. And we're very lucky to have the three co-authors with us today. And secondly, it's an opportunity to draw lessons from these struggles that can be of use in the current phase of the struggle for free and liberatory education at City College and beyond. We're honored to have with us two people who have been in the front lines of the current iteration of this struggle. Beatriz Herrera, a faculty member of the American Federation of Teachers, and EK, a member of the CCSF collective, who will join us also for this conversation. And now I want to turn it over to our moderator for this evening. I'm honored to introduce to you Comrade and Dr. Jason Ferreira. Besides being a co-founder and current community advisor of Center for Political Education, Jason is an associate professor in the Department of Race and Resistance Studies at SF State University. His teaching and scholarship focus on the history of radicalism within and across communities of color. And he's currently working on the first social history of the multiracial struggle that culminated in the Third World Strike at San Francisco State University, and that gave birth to the first Department of Black Studies and the still only College of Ethnic Studies in the nation. So please join me in welcoming Jason Ferreira, who will open up by putting the current struggle at CCSF in the context of insurgent struggles for liberatory education. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. It's a real honor to participate in this event, celebrating the publication of this right here, this new book. Everybody needs to run out and get a copy. That explores a struggle that's really close to all of our hearts, and an institution, a community, in fact, that is really the bedrock of our city. FreeCity, the fight for San Francisco's City College and education for all. This here is a book that is just brimming with lessons, and it really could not have been published at a more pressing moment. With the recent and ongoing threats at City College, it's crystalline clear, as the old saying goes, that freedom is a constant struggle. We pulled together here a really fantastic panel, the three authors of this book, as well as some faculty, as Yasmin was mentioning, and students, to grapple with and pull some organizing insight from this struggle that unfolded between 2012 and 2017, crucially with an eye towards our current moment. Now, I've been asked, given my background, that in addition to moderating this conversation, to share a bit of historical context, to provide some framing for our conversation. As Yasmin mentioned, I've been researching and writing for a number of years now, a book on the Third World Strike at San Francisco State College, San Francisco State University today. This was, as Yasmin mentioned, a struggle that gave birth to ethnic studies, but really involved way, way more than just the creation of an academic discipline. So what I want to do is I want to start by saying, in the event that I go long and need to cut this all short, what are my two sort of objectives? One is that the struggle at City College exists within a much longer historical arc. That is the fight for a relevant education and emancipatory education, one that was both meaningful and transformative, is much longer than just this period of time that we're going to talk about, or that you'll have the opportunity to read about in this book. And secondly, at the same time, what transpired at City, yes, it exists within a sort of longer historical arc, but it also exists within a wider terrain of struggle. That is, it's part of a global battle against austerity and neoliberalism. Okay, so those are the two sort of things I want to ever so briefly talk about. Now, on the historical piece, you know, the Bay Area has long been ground zero for emancipatory, liberatory education. For those of you who are unaware, the Third World Strike at San Francisco State still remains the longest student strike in US history. It was led by the Black Student Union, the Third World Liberation Front, who issued 15 demands that were centered upon, quote unquote, educational self-determination and relevant education. They fought, in short, in brief, to open up institutions of higher education to those who had been historically excluded. And at the same time, they sought to revolutionize the very meaning of education. They called for Black studies, ethnic studies. Truth be told, they called for third world studies. Now, this was an amazing historical moment because there was, first of all, there was widespread participation of students on campus, not just students of color, but also vast numbers of white students, because they too felt compelled to demand a different type of education than they had been receiving. Students from a variety of campuses joined in to support the strike. Now, there were some who organized strikes on their own campuses, such as down the peninsula way at the College of San Mateo, over at the University of California, Berkeley, in which they too issued their own demands for educational self-determination under the banner of their own third world liberation fronts. And others, many others, traveled to the Lake Merced campus, the San Francisco State campus, to march alongside SF State students and faculty. Of special significance were students from City College. You know, students from City College, in fact, students from community colleges in general, really helped fuel the movements of the 60s, and community college students have not gotten the respect and due they deserve. I mean, on the one hand, maybe folks know about Huey Newton and Bobby Seale and Richard Aoki or Marvin X at Merritt College in Oakland, but City was enormously important, was enormously significant. Emory Douglas from the Panthers came through City College. Alex Hing of the Red Guard Party in Chinatown came through City College. Donna Amador of Los Siete de la Raza in the Mission District came through City College. Danny Glover, Clarence Thomas, not the guy on the Supreme Court, but the real deal over in ILWU today. Speedy Woods, George Colbert, all of these guys were part of the BSU Central Committee. They all came through City College. It was a pipeline. So City College is incredibly important. It's a really important site within the Bay Area. During the strike, community members poured onto campus. There were people coming from the Mission, from Chinatown, from the Fillmore, Bayview, Hunters Point, facing arrest, facing the batons of the tax squad. And in truth, authorities at the time feared that this conflict on campus was going to spill over into the surrounding city. Additionally, 2 months into the strike, faculty went out on strike as members of AFT Local 1352, the AFT standing for American Federation of Teachers, and they issued their own set of demands. In short, and that was just a brief little sketch, what I'm trying to say is that what happened was a powerful grassroots movement that shut the institution down. It reflected a coming together, I should say, of a diverse constituencies, a constellation of communities where new relationships, new identities were forged within struggle. And it wasn't what they call, some have called a solidarity of sameness, where everybody was the same. People came from different backgrounds, but they came together around a common vision and a common commitment, and they won. First, Department of Black Studies in a 4-year institution, only College of Ethnic Studies until 2019. It's a little bit different now. We have a College of Ethnic Studies down at Cal State, LA. What I want to highlight here is that in the 1960s, activists at State and other institutions understood that education was a crucible for self-transformation, a potential vehicle for freedom, and a site of insurgent action for deeper democratic practice. While there was intense repression during the strike, mass busts, prison time, just the general mayhem of state violence, what I want to say, though, is that we need to think at the same time about a larger form of repression that came in its wake, structural repression. For as the 70s unfolded, the right wing in this country would initiate, and in California in particular, would initiate a counterinsurgency strategy to reverse all of these dynamics and all of these energies, to crush these democratic advances of the earlier period. Now, we often think of neoliberalism strategy as a narrowly corporate agenda to maximize profits, specific economic strategy of the capitalist class, privatization, deregulation, the promotion of a sort of rabid individualism, the commodification of everything, which of course our panelists are going to talk about tonight. But what I'm trying to say here is that it's equally important for us to recognize that it was a counterinsurgency strategy against the strengths of our movements, against our victories, against the things that we actually won, okay? So we know about the Powell Memorandum in 1971, or we know of the Trilateral Commission's 1975 study, Crises of Democracy, in which an excess of democracy was criticized in the 60s. And so they went on the offensive to remake the terrain itself. When I was researching my book, I went to the Reagan archives. And in the Reagan archives, there was conversations within the Governor Reagan's administration about the implementation of tuition, as a strategy to address the campus crises, right? In other words, to use structural reform to combat these democratic and emancipatory energies. So what happens? What kind of transformation occurred? Well, in the 1960s, what I've been saying is that students asserted themselves as subjects of their own education. They demanded to no longer be treated as objects of learning, as recipients of the status quo. They demanded an education that was relevant to their lives, that the institution had a responsibility to not only reflect the community, but to serve it, and to bring folks from the community onto campus and to develop a curriculum that was community-centered and problem-solving. Faculty saw themselves as workers, not just professionals. They came to understand themselves as laborers, admittedly not blue-collar industrial workers, but still engaged in struggles over work conditions, and that their work conditions were interwoven with the learning conditions of students. Solidarities would therefore be required, and collective organization and collective action would be what it would take to secure those rights. But by the 21st century, in the wake of 40 years of neoliberal policy, new conditions were created such that students would now struggle to simply survive. Access to public education would be increasingly difficult due to rising costs, and in so doing, students would increasingly see themselves as consumers of a scarce commodity. Education was simply seen more so as a ticket out of precarity. Faculty, the political economy of higher education would be totally remade, drawing upon contingent labor, increased workloads, restrictions on academic freedom, all as a part of a strategy to chip away at the gains of earlier generations. But finally, the very notion of education was transformed. No longer was it meant to serve as a place of critique or human development, a part of civic life, or viewed as part of the public good. It was now entirely organized as something that was market-driven and market-directed. Students go to school to fit into the labor market. God forbid they question it or organize for an alternative. So that's the sort of longer arc, the longer story that City sort of forms an important chapter in, but I also mentioned a wider terrain. And I know I have to cut short right now because for lack of time, but let me just say this. This divestment from public education, the abandonment of the public good, the assault upon the democratic or emancipatory possibilities of public education was global. In Chile in 2011, students confronted the establishment to demand a new framework for education, eliminating the profit motive from education. In Chicago, the teachers union in 2012 and in 2019 organized a historic battle against the privatization of public education. In 2015 in South Africa, the Fees Must Fall movement was organized to push back against privatization and the increase of fees in South African education. In 2017 in Puerto Rico, students at the university held a strike in response to hundreds of millions of dollars of cuts that were proposed by Promesa, which was an undemocratic oversight board created to address the island's debt crises, but in reality, she simply was a reflection of the colonial reality of the island. And finally, in 2018 and 19, the Red for Ed strike wave from West Virginia to Oklahoma to Arizona in 2018, to LA in 2019. So what I'm trying to say here is that this is an important frame to think about the campaign to save City College between 2012 and 2017. As important of a local struggle as it was and remains, it was, put simply, an important site of struggle within a larger global movement, right? So with that said, that struggle, that movement continues to unfold around us. And so with this context and framing, I would like to turn it over now to Beatriz Herrera to provide us with a brief update on the situation at City before I introduce the larger panel. Beatriz has been a really dynamic community organizer since 2005, working with working class, immigrant, and communities of color in the city of San Francisco. She's an instructor, as Yasmin was saying, in Latin American and Latinx studies, as well as women and gender studies, and serves on the executive board of CCSF's faculty union, AFT 2121. Welcome, Yasmin, or welcome, Beatriz.
Thank you, Jason. Professor Jason, what an honor to be here. And for my students who are logged in, you might not be able to see each other, but I can see your names. So thank you for joining us. You know, as Professor Jason kind of framed, right, this fight for City College is also a fight that relates to our fight for ethnic studies, right? And we are really standing on the shoulders of giants who have fought for this school and have fought for liberatory education, right? So it's an honor to be here. I'm just gonna provide a little bit of an update as to where we are now within our faculty, within our college, and our most recent fight to maintain the integrity of the college. And then we'll turn it over to our authors to talk about the fight for Free City College. So on March 15, 2021, 163 of our full-time tenured faculty received pink slip notices from our administration telling them that they should expect official layoff notices by May 10th, 2021. To be tenured at a college for my students means that you not only have rights, but that you have protections from things like layoffs. These layoff notices additionally impacted another 450 part-time faculty members because at City College, full-time faculty have seniority. So you cannot lay off a full-time faculty member without first laying off the part-time instructors in their department. This would have impacted 600 faculty members, 60,000 students within one academic year, and 65% of our total faculty at the college. For the last 2 months, our faculty, students, and community have fought back. We've waged a campaign for additional funding, emergency funding, from the city, which is still being negotiated between supervisors. And our faculty bargaining team has successfully negotiated a concessions agreement in the form of salary reductions to avoid these layoffs. What does that mean? Our faculty, your educators, voted, 80% of the faculty voted and said, we would rather reduce our pay than see our colleagues lose their jobs and our programs dismantled and our students lose their courses. That is deeply both ethical, inspirational, and the right decision. This was a decision based on shared values within our faculty union, within our community. And this is not just a fight to save our jobs, but this is a fight to prioritize our vulnerable communities, disabled students, immigrant communities, people of color, and working class people in times of economic austerity. City College, as instructor Tamina Khan wrote, is the heartbeat of San Francisco. How, in a city as rich as San Francisco, and in an institution as beloved as City College, did we get to this place where faculty have to take salary cuts to keep the school alive and thriving? We need to go back in history to our fight waged during our school's accreditation crisis, when the state threatened to close our school. At that moment, faculty, students, community members, and courageous political leaders joined forces. They not only kept the school open, but fought so that courses would be free for students in San Francisco. This is the purpose of our talk today, and I'm so excited to hear from our authors, Marcy Rein, Vicki Ellinger, and Vicki Legion, to talk about the fight for not just free courses at City College, but towards a more liberatory education. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beatriz. Allow me to really quickly introduce our panelists. As Beatriz was saying, we're joined by, am I on mute? No, okay. We're joined by Marcy Rein, one of the co-authors of FreeCity, also an author who co-edited Until the Rulers Obey, Voices from Latin American Social Movements with Clifton Ross, published in 2014. And for many years, Marcy has written about and participated in many different social movements and organizational forms. Vicki Ellinger is a longtime Bay Area activist who has written about subjects from collective childcare to California native language recovery. She's on the board of directors of Making Contact, a social justice radio. And finally, Vicki Legion, who has taught public health at City College for 25 years, is a proud AFT 2121 retiree, and was very active in the Save City College Coalition, convening its research committee. She worked for many years setting up community health worker certificate programs and a transfer program to SF State, where I first met her. So welcome, you three, and thank you so much for the work that you've done in pulling together this book.
I'm Marcy Rein. I get to start. And I want to thank everybody for being here, and especially, and one more time, thank Hasmin and Thomas and the Center for Political Education. I have such deep respect for the work that the center does, and it truly is an honor to be here. I'm going to just say a couple words about the book, FreeCity, The Fight for San Francisco City College and Education for All. Mickey and Vicki and I wrote it to honor and inform the movement, what we say the movement for education justice, that the City College struggle is a part of, as Beatriz and Jason have said. We think of the book as containing a story within a story. So in 2012, as many of you know, the Accrediting Commission for Community and Junior Colleges sanctioned City College and said that it needed to prove that it deserved to stay open. This for one of the top community colleges in the country. The next year, the accreditor said that it was withdrawing accreditation, in effect serving a death sentence on the college. So the inner story is our narrative of the 5-year labor and community campaign that kept the school open and accredited and won the most inclusive free tuition program in the country. But the attack on the college was motivated by the corporate agenda to downsize and privatize community colleges. And that's the outer story, which we're going to spend most of our time today talking about. Just first, really quickly, the organizing campaign itself did have much drama and some very rich lessons. As Beatriz was saying, very many groups pitched in: students, faculty, the American Federation of Teachers Local 2121, and the state and national federations of teachers, many community organizations and coalitions. And all of these different actors made really distinct contributions The union brought incredible resources, but it had some constraints it had to deal with. It had some legal constraints. It needed to really work to bring all the members along. The Labor Community Coalition could go a little farther in terms of what it said and did. And the students really brought the street heat and drew a lot of attention with sit-ins and occupations and other dramatic tactics. So everybody did different kind of work. They employed a multi-pronged strategy, and you could say that they used all the different kinds of power. If you think about in terms of there's legal power and there's regulatory power, they challenged regulations, filed lawsuits, there's political and organizing and mobilizing power, and very important, the narrative power, the struggle for the story of what was really going on. One of the central lessons is the need for research and political education so we can see the context and know who and what we're up against. And we're going to go into a bit of that now, and I'll pass it over to Mickey.
Okay. Jason laid out the really big context, both historical and both length and breadth, as he said. But let's take a look. After World War II, California was bursting at the seams. The population was growing, the state was rich, people were demanding college education, making the prestigious University of California very nervous. But what they came up with was what they called the Master Plan for Higher Education in 1960, a 3-tier plan. The university, the state colleges, now called state universities, the community colleges at the bottom of the heap, always chronically underfunded, but open to everybody, the languages who could benefit from instruction, and completely free. So in the setting, in the period that Jason described of activism and the fight for real education, City really took that lemon and made lemonade out of it. City College was a community serving college, taught people English, helped people prepare for their GED, get career training, study arts and languages, and transfer to four-year colleges. A lot of people, like Jason said, went right up the street to state to fight for ethnic studies there. So this is still true. 3/4 of California's Black and Latinx college students are in community colleges. So when we're talking about shrinking the community colleges, shutting down community college education, that's who we're talking about. Okay, the right has always hated open access, has always hated the idea that education should be about human development, about creativity, about critical thinking. So first, they shut off the money. In the late 1970s, the notorious Proposition 13 cut off property tax funds to local governments. The schools had to beg for pennies. At the same time, prisons tripled in size, in number, but local governments had to raise the sales tax, had to come up with user fees, had to raise money in ways that were even harder on poor people. And that fight, the fight over how the money's raised and how it gets spent, has been ongoing. It's still ongoing. During the Great Recession of 2008, tax revenue went down so much that statewide, the community colleges cut out, I think, 22% of their classes. City kept the cuts from being that deep by cutting everything else, including administrator salaries. But then about 2010, the corporate deformers started to dress up these attacks and rebranded them with the incredible language of student success. Instead of access, we were going to have success, which was all about rationing college education, downsizing the colleges. The City College led the fight against what became called the Student Success Act. And the accreditation fight in 2012 followed right on it, was totally directly an effort to force City to comply with the downsizing, to quit being an example to other community colleges of how to fight for community serving education. They said nothing about the quality of education. It was all about the mission's too broad, the faculty is paid too well, there's too much democracy. So that was the setup, that was called show cause. Show us how come you should stay. So Vicki is going to talk more about the background, what the education reform looks like at the community college level. Go, Vicki.
Right. Okay. Hi, everybody. And Mickey is going to show some slides, which have not been all translated into Spanish as yet, but will be translated into Spanish in the follow-up mailing. So we thank the patience of the Spanish speakers. At the community college, education deform looks like shrinking everything. And the first chancellor who came in, who was imposed under the threat of a state takeover, said, well, City College might survive, but you won't recognize yourself. And they came up with, as Mickey said, this definition of student success that was very narrow and just emphasized completing a degree or certificate of economic value. And that's a definition of student success that was enforced very vigorously and would tend to turn the college into a degree mill. So what are some of the things that then become a frill under this definition of student success? So learning how to speak Tagalog so you can talk with your grandmother, learning your people's history in a Black history class or a Latinx history class, having new immigrants learn English, which had historically been almost half of City College students, people from the neighborhoods learning how to be drug and alcohol counselors or healthcare interpreters, elders doing art projects and building community with each other. So all of that is to be shoved aside. And this chancellor under the takeover what set out to cut the mission in half. And so she held a meeting that went till 2 a.m. That would cut out English as a second language, and that would English as a second language and lifelong learning, the ability of people to take 1 or 2 classes for their own development. So what the deformers left standing was workforce education, so that businesses could externalize the costs of training their workforce, and transfer education. And then they built in many programs and policies to pressure students to attend full time. Now, full-time students have never been more than 10% of students at City College. So why would you come up with policies that basically are out to exclude 90% of your students? And the answer is because full-time students require student loans. If you're taking a 5-course load, you will not have time to work your way through college, which had been the way that community college was so affordable. So this shrinkage of the mission then led to shrinkage of enrollment. And you see on the blue line how City College has gone from 100,000 to, we're a little over 50,000. So it's a drastic shrinkage. And the important thing to understand is that this is happening all over the state. So it's not just City College, although City College is kind of getting it, very hard. But the statewide system has also shrunk by 600,000 students. And I think, Mick, don't we have a slide on that? Okay, so anyway, the statewide community college system is down by 600,000 students. And that's really important so that we understand that we have allies all over the state. It's not just us alone. The other thing that's happening is the shrinking of educational offerings. So we have one of the new policies is to have the curriculum dominated by 6 to 10 super majors. And then we can squeeze out all those things that Jason talked about that we won in the 1960s and that I won when I was, I'm old enough that I was like having sit-ins for days. Right now on the chopping block, we had the Philippine Studies program, we had the Women's Studies program that had we not accepted this miserable agreement, those programs would be dust. So, the programs that help our students grow into the new men and women that can solve the burning problems in our communities and the world, those are the programs that are getting squeezed out by this highly standardized curriculum that they have in mind. Okay, so the reverse of these many programs to kind of put students on a moving sidewalk to full-time attendance. Oh, okay. So this slide it just shows that during the period of the City College struggle, the policies are coming in, every year, every 2 years, and with your secret decoder ring that I know you have on your finger, you can see that almost all these policies are about full-time attendance. So, the policies are just raining down from Sacramento. Okay, so at the next slide, you're going to see kind of the other side of the moon, which is we have students on the moving sidewalk to full-time, but then we also are pushing out the disposable categories of students. And Nick, can you put up that slide? Okay, and so we have what we call student push-out policies, and those are also coming thick and fast. And we're just giving 2 quick examples of these. So we have the repeatability rule, and that impacted 650 classes at City College. It would, under this rule that came from Sacramento, it limits the number of times that students can take skill-based classes to 4, you can only take 4 in the series. So that starts wiping out the art programs, wiping out dance, theater, physical education, world languages. This really strikes at the heart of the college as a really important cultural institution. And one example out of so many is the music department used to offer 100 classes per semester, and now it's offering 10 classes per semester. So this is stripping out our cultural wealth. The second student push-out policy is the academic progress rule. And that was taking students who have shaky grades and causing them to lose their fee waiver so that they have to pay tuition. And so that strikes at the second chance students, the third chance students, really the students who need the community college as a place that they can get their footing again if they've had, personal challenges or academic challenges. And the Board of Governors did a study where they noted that it would be 45,000 students who would be pushed out by this policy, and mostly Black, Latinx, Pacific Islanders, young students, and students with disabilities. And then they voted for it. So it's, it's just part of the downsizing. Okay, so now we're going to move to, where did these policies come from? Who is raining down the policies that are coming from Sacramento?
So I'm going to do a super quick tour through this part of the material because we're running short on time, and I really want to have time to hear from Beatriz Herrera and EK. But the slide that Mickey is putting up, I want to give credit for this and the timeline slide to our friend Debbie Klein with the Faculty Association for California Community Colleges, who has also done some really important research. And what we're trying to look at is the how of how these things get to be actually real and coming down on City College and causing the layoffs and student push out. So there are several different actors, and I'm just going to highlight what we call the philanthro-capitalist foundations, because they're foundations that are funded by corporations, and their giving actually serves the interests of the corporations that funded them. So and then what they do is they fund think tanks and advocacy groups and professional associations who can, turn their ideas into actual policies and then go lobby the legislature, sit in meetings with the chancellor and the governor and advocate. And there's very important to note that this is a bipartisan project. So I'll give you just a couple of quick details. The central foundation in all of this is the Lumina Foundation. It was created from the student loan industry in the year 2000. The number 2 person from the Student Loan Marketing Corporation had a central role in Lumina when it started, as did several other people from that industry. And it's just one really concrete example. It's very embedded in California. So the Student Success Task Force that Mickey mentioned, that was the origin of, not that there were things before, but it was the first large-scale implementation of this reform in California. That task force was funded by Lumina. The executive director was a person named Amy Supinger, who had been an analyst for the legislature, but then became the executive director. And after the task force, she went to work for Lumina as their state strategy person. In that role, in 2016-17, she co-authored a document called the Vision for Success, which is the guiding document that the current state chancellor is using. And it's, full of this definition of success that we were talking about. Lumina also funds the Foundation for California Community Colleges, which is a part of the state community college system. So that gives you a little taste of how this stuff is really embedded. Governor Jerry Brown, on his way out of office, we call this Jerry Brown's goodbye kiss. He buried several things in the budget that really pushed forward this reform project. One was funding for the guided pathways, the 6 to 10 meta majors. One was $100 million for a new community college that would be entirely online. that has since then placed one student in a job. That's an aside. And he changed the funding formula for community college from funding on the basis of enrollment to funding, what we call performance funding, which really disadvantages community serving schools like City College. The question we also ask, who stands to gain? And I think this is somewhat obvious. The student loan industry is a big winner. If you force students through so that they can't work part-time, it pushes them right into the debt trap. Big tech is another winner with all of this education going online. For-profit colleges, which do some of the same kinds of career training, but according to a study by the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, the Legislative Analyst's Office, they can cost up to 17 times as much as community colleges. They're private colleges doing what our public schools were doing. And in San Francisco with City, we also saw that real estate interests really stood to gain because City College sits on some very valuable land. And since 2012, there's been discussion about selling City College property. The administration building at 33 Gough Street is on long-term lease to a private developer. There's been, the Civic Center campus was closed. There's talk of selling that, as well as downtown and Chinatown campuses. So there's a real estate interest. Just to wrap up really quickly, this can seem kind of daunting, this big constellation of forces, but we take a lot of heart from the Red for Ed movement that Jason had mentioned. It's really important to unmask the source and the motivation of the policies. And indeed, a lot of this research that we develop in the book came out of the struggle itself, out of the research committee. But in Red for Ed, teachers and students and community groups spent years educating and organizing around the reforms in kindergarten through 12. By 2018, what was common sense in the 1990s was a big fight. And we can do the same. We can make a big fight over what community colleges should be and who they should serve. And that's all we got. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you, Mickey. And thank you, Marcy. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to, sort of broaden the circle a bit more and bring Beatriz back into the conversation. And, if City College is the heartbeat of the city, as Beatriz referred to, then the heartbeat of City are students. And in that spirit, I would like to bring EK into the conversation as well. EK is a Vietnamese Chinese American artist and member of the abolitionist art activism group CCSF Collective, to talk about their experiences and their thoughts about this clearly ongoing struggle at City College. So without further ado, EK, Beatriz.
Yeah, I want to invite EK to just share a little bit about some of, CCSF Collective's really effective kind of organizing and ways that they've been able to pull in students in this fight.
Just to keep it short, we want to give an anti-racist approach when it comes to these austerity measures. And also when it comes to students resisting, being unafraid to really speak out very directly when it comes to the people that are in power and how we want to reclaim the narrative, how we want to protect our school.
And so thank you, EK, for, sharing. I've been really inspired by the work and the leadership of the CCSF Collective. And, not surprisingly, our student leaders are some of the most, politically savvy, understanding of kind of the complexities of policy at City College than, even some of my faculty colleagues, because, our students are those who are directly impacted, right? Our students are the ones that are like, I was one class away from finishing my certificate and suddenly it disappeared from the schedule, right? And so what's happens when, you know, our courses are destabilized by this type of not just administrative policy, but, you know, the lack of funding at City College has a real detrimental effect to our students who are, you know, seeking to complete their transfer requirements, seeking to complete certifications, and seeking, you know, the goals to meet the goals that they came to City College in the first place. And I know that for me, you know, as an instructor at City, you know, I come from a community organizing background, and, you know, I got my master's at UC Berkeley, and I was like, okay, I mean, you know, maybe there's an opportunity for me to start teaching and kind of shift gears here a little bit. I didn't know that coming to City, I would be both teaching the history of social movement and activism and continuing that work in the process, because it's the work required of our instructors. I mean, both our students and our faculty are working double time, right? So we're in the streets on Monday, we come home, we're grading papers. The next day we're at a hearing till 2 a.m, right? With the Board of Trustees. And then we're emailing our students about making sure everybody's logged in the morning. I'm not trying to make points about how hard it is, but, you know, there's an unfair burden to, you know, the rigor required to keep this school alive. And I think across the board, you know, whether you're an instructor in an institution of higher education or an instructor, an educator, a teacher within SFUSD, you know, teachers do this work because we care about our students. We care about course content. We care about education. So, you know, some of the critiques that I've heard, even from political leadership around this fight for City, you know, we've heard people say to us, you just care about your jobs. It's about more than our jobs, right? Like, instructors are here because we know that, at least for me, right, liberatory education is life-giving. I mean, I'm an ethnic studies scholar, I'm an ethnic studies student. You know, this course content, joining and being part of social movement changed my life. It's what I do, it's who I am, right? And we need to continue to provide opportunities for our students to plug in, to be inspired, and to continue this fight, which unfortunately does not end. We also hear, right, from, you know, national leadership that with a new president, whose wife, Jill Biden, right, works and loves City Colleges dearly, that maybe we're in a new time where there will be funding going to City Colleges in ways that we haven't seen previously. But I think, you know, one of the challenges is that this funding does not come to instructors or to programs, right? Sometimes this funding goes to a new building, or, you know, fixing the pavement, or, you know, and, you know, we can't teach our classes without our students. Our students can't have classes without their educators. So in this world, students and faculty are natural allies. We need each other, and we're doing everything we can in this moment, and have done everything we can in the past to keep this school open, thriving, but it's going to take a lot more than what we have to be able to fight against all of these fronts that were so, you know, eloquently named by, you know, our authors today. I mean, the forces that we're up against, that's no joke, right? We're talking about, you know, liberalism, racism, you know, name every oppression that exists out there, and it's playing out at City College, right? Let alone gentrification. So I'm naming some things for my students, you know, I'm thinking of you right now. We have an extra credit coming up, but so, you know, there's a lot at stake, but, you know, I think the invitation for all who are on this call is join us. We need you. And, you know, I don't know if there's something else EK would love to add. I've just been so inspired by your leadership and brilliance in this moment, in this mini campaign that we were able to win. And I know we were having some connectivity issues, but I really think it's great for us to hear from you directly about, you know, what has been effective in terms of the student organizing piece at the college.
Thank you so much. I think right now it's significantly better now that I turned the video off. So I hope there are not any audio issues. Something that has been key within our student organizing, which is working with different community organizations, then also this baseline of we have to center the most vulnerable communities. And in terms of being an abolitionist group, it's this idea of dismantling the systems that are harming us. We wanted to make a direct connection between the austerity cuts and also the violence that it leads to. We did a CCSF collective did a AAPI and Black Solidarity action on May 6th. And that is to say these cuts, such as to ESL, to the Philippine Studies Department, or to even African American studies, it directly affects our communities. It directly takes away our resources that are important and keep us protected. It takes away our faculty, it's people that are healers to us, people that we learn from and really help us carry on with our lives. And I'm actually glad my video isn't on because I could be so upset over this. And I don't think that people outside of the community college understand how vital it is to keep this. So we've been just trying to address things statewide, because I'm also part of the Student Senate of California Community Colleges. And I intentionally joined the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee because I wanted to change things from the statewide system. And we are trying to partner up with different groups such as the Black Student Union.
EK, just a request to slow down for all the audience. Thank you.
Okay, sure thing. And then we're trying to work with the California BSU Coalition or the Black Student Union Coalition to center how are we preventing these cost cuts and how that's connected to the funding that goes to the student-centered funding formula alongside all these budget cuts when there is money getting pulled to the California surplus money, for example, or do city money or do progressive taxes.
So that last point, right? That last point that EK brought up, you know, speaks directly to some of what our authors spoke about, right? So this new policy that is coming from the statewide level from Sacramento SCIF, the student-centered funding formula. And get this, right? They use this equity argument, right? They say, well, you know, Black and Latino students of color, API have lower graduation rates at the statewide level. And we need to support them by making sure that, you know, they're enrolled full-time and they are in that school for 2 years at the city college level, and they're not distracted by all of these so-called elective courses. And we want to incentivize city colleges at the statewide level to make sure that these students graduate in 2 years, are enrolled full-time, and then transfer to a UC or a state school. They use that to say, we're helping, right? We're helping students of color graduate and transfer to get their BA, but they're not, right? And I'm thinking about my students and all the times I've met with my students and I'm like, what's going on? What's your struggle? I have 3 jobs. I haven't been able to sleep. I'm taking care of my baby brother. You know, I suddenly, you know, it's COVID, my Wi-Fi is out, right? As we're seeing right now, right? I can't, you know, I did transfer. I got into Berkeley, couldn't afford it. I came back, right? I got into state, couldn't afford it. I came back, right? So this is a problem. They're not understanding what the material reality is for our students. And frankly, I don't think they care. So this is a fight to make them care, right? We have to organize ourselves. We have to understand city and statewide policy if we want to make sure that CCSF remains, you know, a vibrant, thriving college for our students.
Thank you, Beatriz. I'm just curious, EK, Beatriz, for those of us who are not at City College, and given the recent you know, the recent development which you talked about at the top of our our gathering here, what can folks do? What's happening that folks can do to actively support? What kind of calls to action are there for folks?
Go ahead, EK.
Okay, well, I just know that on the student end of things, we're building a coalition and inviting different community members. So right now it's just getting more membership with that, and I'm just including a Google form for that within the chat. We're still preparing different actions, but right now it is really just joining the efforts of learning more about what's going on and then building that political education with the FreeCity Collective, hopefully.
So I'm really glad that EK put in the chat, right, a link for how to get connected to CCSF Collective. It might be helpful too if you can put in like the Instagram page for CCSF Collective. We've been really learning from our student leaders in this moment of like virtual organizing where we can't door knock and find people in their office. Our students are like, hey, we organized using a platform called Discord, right? We use Instagram to stay in touch. We use our WhatsApp, right? First things first, we have to find ways to be in communication with one another, right? So that's really important in this time where most of us are working from home. I think on the faculty side, the conversation about getting city funding for City College, emergency city funding is still at play. So there are conversations happening between Hillary Ronan's office, Gordon Marr's office, Supervisor Shimon Walton's office. And, I want to invite all of you who live in San Francisco, and even if you don't, to contact the supervisors, the Board of Supervisors, and tell them that City College is a priority for the residents of San Francisco, and we need city investment, right? The city invests in schools within SFUSD. There's a funding stream called PEEF that helps in times of austerity to stabilize the schools. We need that at City College as well. And if you're a student, if you're a faculty member, we need to pressure our own trustees and chancellor to say, stand with us, work with your students, work with your faculty. Don't make policies with the city or with the state without consulting with us. We know what's best for our schools and our programs. And we need you to fight for us. It's not enough to say, hey, we tried to make some calls. There's no money out there. We need you to make it happen. I mean, that's the role of an organizer. You got to, where there's a will, there's a way, and you got to figure it out, right? So I'm going to put in the chat a couple links to contacts to our trustees, to our supervisors, and really say, hey, I was a former student, I'm a current student, we need your support. Ultimately, it's about funding to stabilize the college.
Thank you, Beatriz. So it's about 6:10. We've got about 20 minutes left. I'd like to open it up for Q&A and have it be more of a sort of organic conversation. But before I do, I have to do my due diligence. Before we jump into the Q&A with the panelists, and I want to remind you again, you've been seeing it in the chat a number of times. If you have questions, just put it in that Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom page. But I want to take a moment to make an appeal. Speaking of needing money, the Center for Political Education, has been a resource. Many of you know this, I think, but we've been a resource for over 20 years, dedicated to this type of programming like tonight, grounded in historical knowledge, committed to sharp analysis and strategy, and to strengthening the capacities of our social movements and the left. As a people-centered resource, we also, by principle and by necessity, are people-powered. Spaces like this, we can't take for granted. There are movement spaces, left spaces like the Brecht Forum in New York that have had to fold for lack of support. And so we want to ask you at this moment to show some support. if we were together, this would be the moment that people will be coming around with a little hat saying, give what you can, if you can. But what we're going to do instead is Thomas is going to drop a link where you can donate to the CPE. And, if you believe in the revolution and you can do so, please do. So anyway, let me usher in then our final portion of the evening, the Q&A, and make these take the moderator's prerogative by kicking it off. And I want to ask the panelists, the authors of this book. It's a very inspiring book, and I think that y'all have really pointed to the importance of a power analysis, of analyzing your opposition, identifying your targets and pressure points. But it's also there's an analysis in here of the social movements themselves, right? It ends in some ways as a victory, right? Free City, it's a moment of victory. So now here we are still dealing with the budget cuts. So what happened? I thought we won. Somebody might say, wait a minute, I thought City College was free. I thought commitments were made by the city to make it free. And yet these cuts still keep on coming. So how do we understand the ebb and flow of this struggle?
So
I'll throw this to Marcy.
So I can take a stab and my co-authors can chime in. I think there were some things that were definitely won by that phase. I mean, City College did not lose its accreditation. It has Free City, which is really a model. When you look at other quote unquote free tuition programs, Free City is by far the most inclusive. The struggle pushed out the leadership at that time of the accrediting commission, which was nasty and vengeful and was terrorizing community colleges around the state. Compton College had been under state takeover. Compton is a school whose student body is something like 90% Black and Latinx in Los Angeles County. It got its local autonomy back. So there were wins, on that level. I think we saw, and we're seeing in this conversation today, that there were relationships built, there were leaders built, and the way that the struggle is continuing from that basis. And I think I said this a little bit earlier, but the analysis that we developed kind of points the way to a lot more work to be done. So we can see that this was a victory. It established a basis, and now we know more. I mean, it's like the students are now looking at organizing statewide. That should be an inspiration for everybody, because now we see that that's where the policy is actually coming from, that's raining down on city. At the same time, as Beatriz was saying, there's really important things that can be done locally, pressing the supervisors, pressing the college to use all of the funding that's available to it. There's federal funding that they could be using to avoid the salary cuts and the layoffs, and they're refusing to do it, saying that the state is forcing them to downsize. So there's pressure needed on those things. So I think, both our big picture is a win, the leadership we built is a win, and City College is still here to fight. I mean, I think we do need that long-term perspective, and anybody wants to add anything to that, please do.
Yeah, I wanted to just chime in briefly. If people remember the Chicago Teachers Union strike, which was, a giant strike of, tens of thousands of people, it almost took over the city. They said the whole city was floating in red t-shirts. So they won that round of their strike, and then Mayor 1% Rahm Emanuel closed 50 schools a few months after the big strike. And so how I think about that is that the Chicago Teachers Union absolutely pushed forward the struggle for education justice in the United States by all their emphasis on working with communities, prioritizing support for communities, bargaining for the common good. Those things were victories that no one can take away. And it was a battle, and we're in a long war, you know, and I think that the idea that we're in a marathon, we're not in a sprint, is very important, even so that organizers don't, you know, fry themselves out. You know, we're up against the big boys, and it's going to be a long struggle with a lot of phases.
So there's a number of questions in the Q&A, many of them relating to variations of kind of that question I asked about a call to action and where to, what to focus on next. I'm going to read one that kind of encapsulates some of that. I'm a pink slipped faculty member who held my nose and voted yes on the one-year agreement to save classes, programs, and jobs. I've been active in the most recent union efforts, and I know the powers that be are moving to the next round of cuts very quickly. I'm somewhat frustrated that our recent efforts seem somewhat unfocused, but and here's the question: what is the best target of our next battle in this, as Vicki just said, war against the austerity cuts?
I mean, I'm not an author, but I can
I mean, I
answer.
think this is open to anybody,
And yeah, you're an author of the struggle.
Author struggle. Okay, as I write with my feather quilt. No, I was kidding. I think the next immediate target is the supervisors, the board of supervisors. You know, the article that came out after the tentative agreement for concessions, once the board of trustees approved it, was an article where different supervisors told reporters, we're interested in funding. They hadn't told us that. They hadn't told us that last week, right? So that's a good sign, right? That our organizing efforts, our actions, our media coverage, our phone banks, our our marches, all of that has been influencing them, right? And the request, the fight for the funding was a budget supplemental in the amount of $30 million immediately to stabilize our programs. So that fight is still live. I think it's important to also, if we can, reach out to some of our supervisors who are on the budget committees, including Matt Haney, D6 supervisor, and Shimon Walton, supervisor for District 10. They both care about equity. They both care about their constituents. So they need to hear from their constituents about why funding cities should be a priority.
Anybody else?
I also think I very much agree with what Beatriz said for kind of immediate focus, as well as looking into the Biden money that is floating around. I heard they were planning to use it for technology, if you can believe that. But I also think that we should begin to sort of pull the mask off of the Lumina Foundation and, and start to say, these policies that are kind of making the walls close in on the community college, that they are motivated by the student loan industry, by the technology industry. I think we need to start agitating around that as well, because that will delegitimize all their rhetoric, as Beatriz said, about we're doing this to help you while we're forcing out 600,000 of you. I can't explain that. And we have to highlight that. We have to say, we're not going to let you use the word equity for getting rid of students. Sorry, that's not going to work.
And just to remember that the budget the budget is not an act of God. The budget is not a force of nature. The budget comes from the legislature. It's one of the places that we can exercise some political power and, you know, look at our assembly people, look at our senators. The education budget should be bigger. You know, Newsom says he's going to have pre-K. That's good. Let's look at the state budget, see what's in there for higher education, make sure that the community colleges get what they need. You know, it's a place we can exercise some direct pressure.
So, and just also in the budget, get rid of the student-centered funding formula. And there are some really nasty bills in the state legislature that I noticed there's a comment in the chat from Debbie Klein, who works with the Faculty Association for Community Colleges. That's an umbrella group that's actually working on the ground in Sacramento. Definitely a place to start. I know there's a bill, it may have died, but they want to do a common course numbering system for the entire community college system. And think about that. It seems like totally bureaucratic, but we're talking about shrinking and we're talking about narrowing the avenues for all these kind of explorations that have been lifted up in this discussion. And what better way to do it than say, well, sorry, you know, there's no number for you. So that's I would do some research. That's my understanding of it. I'm not an expert, but to track there's this attack is ongoing, and to be in touch with a group like FAC, who is tracking this stuff.
I also wanted to lift up something that EK mentioned, and that is the relationship with the movement for abolition, the abolitionist movement, and defunding the police. I remember I was reading something the other day where the budget deficit, the $40 million is 6% of the SFPD's budget. And so this question of budgets and there being a lack of money, it's not that there's not a lack of money, it's that it's not prioritized. Other entities are prioritized. And so that's EK's point is a really important one, that there's a way in which it seems the struggle to defend City College, that recognizes City College as the heartbeat of the city, as a life-sustaining community safety institution, is a much smarter investment than the SFPD, right? And that has the ability then to bridge different constituencies together. I mean, one of the questions that I had is sort of like, well, what happened to that coalition that was stitched together after the victory? Why is that coalition still in existence? Or after the victory, after the struggle at state, for instance, a lot of the coalition fell apart, right? There wasn't the sort of long vision organizing. It was all centered around the immediate campaign for ethnic studies. So what I hear EK saying is that, we need to continue building those bridges, developing those coalitions, and being imaginative in how we understand the struggle at City College. That is not just about funding, but it's about, protecting working class life, or the real San Francisco, as I like to say it. Anyway, let me see. I think we've got a couple minutes left. Let me see if there's London Breed should be held accountable. Has London Breed weighed in? Does anybody know?
Last year, before COVID hit, the majority of the Board of Supervisors and the faculty union were working on something called WRF version 2 to bring in revenue to the college, millions of dollars. And most people were on board. Once COVID hit, people's attention went elsewhere. Everybody was in a crisis. So we were already struggling with funding. We had a tentative policy proposal ready. COVID hit, that went away. And, you know, last year when we tried to pass WERF, the Workforce Economic Recovery Fund, you know, it got to the mayor and she said, I don't support, you know, these constant requests from City College for a bailout from the city. Like you know, your school is fiscally irresponsible. And we give you money and then it disappears into the ether, right? It's like, you know, the faculty and the students are like, you're not hearing us. Like, those are our administrators, like, help us stabilize our programs. So there's a way sometimes that people conflate all of these different, you know, groups that are involved and don't realize that they're punishing our students and our faculty in ways that are painful.